Well, I think that governments and politicians more generally do have much more influence and control over the agenda than sometimes they realise, and that sometimes it may feel. There's no doubt that the media has changed and developed in a way, a number of trends that have led to a situation where the media is more pervasive, noisier, more difficult, more querulous, more judgmental, and is in the faces of ministers and other politicians much more maybe than it used to be. And I think that's just a fact. The Leveson inquiry may lead to some changes in relation to that, but while that is the fact, then I think politicians do have to see it as part of their job and have it as part of their armoury, in a sense to push back on that and give themselves the strategic space to do their job, which is to devise sensible policies and implement them and govern. Now, I think we sometimes did that right. I think sometimes we maybe, and I know Chris would agree with this, that we got too close to different parts of the media, but I think what we always tried to do was to stay within a strategic space against a media that is always trying to force you to be tactical, to respond to its agenda day by day, even hour by hour.
I think there's a list of subjects on which most politicians at top level simply you can't have a rational discussion about. The EU is undoubtedly one, especially a problem for the Tory party, but it was a problem for us too. Immigration and asylum, I mean, just look at the Mail and the Express nearly every day. Prison policy, drugs policy. One could draw up a little list of things on which it's not possible to have a normal, sensible discussion, though. If you had an individual constituent with you one-to-one, the odds are you could have a rational discussion.
For example, within the welfare reform debate, I think that sometimes both of the main parties have allowed the terrain for the debate to be set by the media as opposed to be set by themselves, real experts, think tanks, people who actually have a proper interest in getting a debate going, as opposed to what some of the press have, which is an instinct to get a debate not going at all, or only going on a very narrow set of terms. I didn't accept what Peter Riddle was saying, that we were terribly risk averse in the first term. I think we did a hell of a lot in the first term, and some of the best things we did were in the first term, and some of them were very, very difficult and required real risk. I mean, looking back, when you talk about being risk averse, back in opposition, it sounds ridiculous now, but Clause 4 was a big risk to Tony Blair's leadership. When we got into government, Tony Blair saying, I'm going to do this bloody Irish thing, whether it breaks me or not, that was a big risk. Kosovo was a big risk. There were lots of issues along the way that on the economy, Bank of England independence, again, people look back and say, well, that was a blindingly obvious thing to do. You could have done it any time in the last half century, but people didn't. So these were all big risks.
I don't disagree with the trip to Hayman Island that Tony Blair and Alistair made. I thought, even though I have a bit of track record where Murdoch's concerned, I thought that was strategically the right thing to do. I think I'd have gone to Hayman Island, I'd have laughed at his jokes and slapped him on the back and struck with deadly force in week 1 after the election.
Which you say relentlessly in your diaries, and you're obviously very disappointed when we don't do that.
Well, no, I'm not disappointed.
No,
I never expected it. I never expected it.
Bruce always thought we might do something like that.
I never did, really. And I understand, because it worked. What you did worked, didn't it? We got away with it for 2 elections. I thought it would only get away with it for 1 election.
The centre of gravity, I said in my evidence to the Leveson inquiry that I felt what I call the Murdoch, Dacre, Desmond generation was morally and reputationally incapable of reversing the damage to our culture, for which they, as leaders of the industry at this time, have been chiefly responsible.
Yes, I want to see them cut down to size. I don't see why one individual, for example, in the case of News International, should own, well, they did own 4 national newspapers, one of which has had to close down in circumstances we all know about, plus a TV company that is now 60% of British homes. I think that's too much, so I'd break them up for a start. The problem with just breaking them up, however, I'd say 1 daily and 1 Sunday per proprietor, and everything else must go on the market.
And if nobody buys it?
Well, if nobody buys it, as might happen, for example, in the case of the Express, I say I think I could live with that.
And if the
but as far as the Sun and the Times and Sunday Times, together they make a profit, actually. They only got it past Mrs. Thatcher without a Monopolies Commission inquiry because they pretended that it was making a loss.
And they made a lot of agreements that have never been disclosed. The other thing I'm surprised Chris doesn't go on about, and this is something I put in my evidence to Leveson, I pointed out that the reason why Rupert Murdoch is an American citizen is because he wasn't allowed to have American media interests without being an American citizen. Well, I wonder if the British media might not apply.
Oh, I do go on about that. I've just drafted my evidence to Leveson, and that's in there.
What I said when I went to the Leveson inquiry was that, you see, what the press are trying to do at the moment is to say that anything beyond a kind of fairly cosy little relationship that they've enjoyed in the numerous last chance saloons and wake-up calls that they've had is a sort of descent into terrible totalitarianism. We're all going to become like, you know, Soviet, communist Russia, let alone Putin now. And they're deliberately trying to get you into this debate. And I felt actually Chris Patten even was falling into this trap of saying that if you talk about a new system of regulation, which ultimately does have to come from government, Parliament has to vote for it, that is, quotes, this statutory regulation that we can't have. So I think that it should easily be possible to bring forward legislation that allows for the creation of a regulatory body with power, real power, and which is independent of political interests and independent of media interests. And can then, you know, getting the right people for it, of course, is going to be very difficult. And it'd be very, very sensitive. But there are lots of sensitive bodies where you get people in who do a job, and that's what this needs. One
of the reasons why standards on our broadcast media are so much higher than in our written media is because the broadcast media is regulated.
And also the broadcasters who've been to the Leveson inquiry, including actually Nick Davis on The Guardian, who's worked across the media field, he made the point, and broadcasters made the point, that they've never felt that the regulations as they stand have prevented them from making legitimate journalistic inquiry into any endeavour they've been involved in. The reason we've got to this place is because of phone hacking. But again, as I said in my submission to Leveson, I think phone hacking it's not beside the point, and it's serious criminal activity, and lots of people have rightly been offended by it, and lots of people are being paid out damages, myself included. But I think it's less serious than the impact that what I call the Murdoch, Dacre, Desmond leadership of the industry has had upon standards more generally.